Okay, I think it's about time to begin. I hope everyone is doing well this morning. We are in 1 Kings chapter 17. Well, we're going to start 18, but I didn't finish the latter part of chapter 17. So I just want to quickly review where we are. Now, remember, when we're going through these narratives of Elijah and Elisha, we are looking at the lessons that the writer is telling us about God. God's the hero of the Bible, and the prophets, his servants. And so these narratives that come along, when the prophet preaches or the prophet gets chased out of the town, things of that nature, we're always looking as to what Scripture is telling us about what God is doing, how he's providing, how he's protecting. And so we learn a lot about the God that we serve through these Old Testament narratives. And that's, the prophets represent the power of God and the Word of God, of course. So when we looked at 1 Kings chapter 16, we noticed how evil Ahab is and how evil the kings before him were. But in Ahab's situation during his reign, why is he chosen for the extended interaction with Elijah? Why is he chosen? Why is Ahab the focus and Elijah the focus? I mean, all the other kings, we don't even get a chapter on them. It's like a few verses here, a few verses there on this king, that king. But it's kind of like there's a pause in regard to Ahab. So what's the reason for the pause, for this more detailed interaction? But, yeah, it seems to be a critical turning point in North Israel. See, Ahab is teetering on full-blown idolatry, okay? But he still has his foot a little bit with God, Yahweh, the Lord, Adonai, the Lord of hosts. And so he's like straddling the fence a little bit. And so North Israel is that way too. That's going to be the significance of the battle at Mount Carmel, because what does Elijah say? Just the same thing that Joshua said to the people: choose whom you're going to serve. Okay? So this is a critical period in the life of God's people in North Israel. So we have a pause in the quick action narrative. Evil king, evil king, evil king, evil king, very, very evil king. And so the details are being amplified. Why is he so evil? Well, he's mimicking what Jeroboam did. The sins of Jeroboam is the motto that we read about. He's the standard for all the northern kings. They're going to be, they continued in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, okay? And so this is going to be a constant refrain about the reign of the northern kings. There is not a good king that reigns in North Israel. None. In the kingdom of Judah, there's a few good kings, okay? But in North Israel, it just gets bad until they're taken away in captivity in 722 BC by what empire? What was the empire that took North Israel into captivity? It's also the empire that sort of began the Samaritans. So what was it? What empire? You want a multiple choice? How about a multiple choice? Was it the empire of the Sumerians? Was it the empire of the Assyrians? Or was it the empire of the Babylonians? Babylonians, Assyrians? Okay. Two vocalized their decision. So this is Assyrians. Raise your hand if it was the Assyrians. Raise your hand if it were the Babylonians. Scared? You're scared? Okay. It's the Assyrians. The Assyrians took North Israel into captivity. And it was Nebuchadnezzar of the Babylonians that took the southern kingdom of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin into captivity in 586 BC, where they dwelt there for how many years? How long was their captivity before they were released by Cyrus? 70 years. 70 years. And that was prophesied by Jeremiah. They would be in captivity for 70 years. And sure enough, they were allowed to go home and rebuild Jerusalem and their cities and their homes and all that. In fact, it was paid for by Cyrus. So, these junctures where there's a pause in a narrative, you need to recognize that. You should ask yourself, why such an extended, detailed account of Ahab? The same thing happens in Isaiah. When Isaiah deals with King Ahaz, because it is a pivotal time. Ahaz is floundering and showing lack of faith. And once he chooses not to obey God, it becomes accelerated that Israel falls into captivity. There's one good king that has a period of restoration, but it doesn't last. So here we have Elijah who comes out of nowhere. I mean, we don't know anything about him, but basically where he's from. But he meets Ahab, and he tells Ahab, who has married Jezebel, who worships what God? Jezebel's God is Baal, and Baal's counterpart, the Asherah. Okay? Those are the male and female gods of the Canaanites. So, when we see the battle on Mount Carmel, it's going to be between God and Baal. Now, Baal was the god of what? He's the most powerful god of the Canaanites because he was the ruler of what?
Was it fertility of the land?
Asherah was the goddess of fertility and all that. But in order for land to be fertile, it has to receive what? Water. Okay? And so Baal was the god of the storm, the god of the lightning. Okay? So you can imagine when we get to the battle, when God licks up, sends fire from heaven, which is probably a lightning bolt that devours the sacrifice and laps up all the water, that it's not Baal doing it, it is the God of Elijah that's achieving that. So you have to keep in mind, what is the battle? Okay? The battle is always between God and the gods. And he demonstrates this to Egypt. He demonstrates this to the prophets, the idolatry. The prophets joke about the idols that they make that teeter, and they have to balance them. You know, the wind comes and kind of blows them over. And, you know, it's just, they're very sarcastic, the prophets are. So man makes an idol, as the Canaanites have done. And then after man makes the idol, he bows down to that which he made. And the prophets just get a kick out of that. That's the funniest thing in the world. That you would build an idol and then you would bow down to it. Okay? And so from the standpoint is, in that situation, the one who's superior is actually the man who builds the idol. Okay? So you have to appreciate the paganism and the loyalists of Israel who want to be faithful to God. Okay? It is a battle. Now, we don't normally think about gods, okay? But what one believes comes out in one's behavior, right? So if you have the goddess of fertility or Aphrodite or whatever, well, no wonder the people are behaving the way that they do in regard to sex or money or their lifestyle, their traditions. It comes as a result of the traditions or the beliefs that they have, you know, conferred upon these gods that have been passed down to all these people throughout the centuries. So it's important to understand who has the heart of the people. And why is it so tempting and easy to leave the true God for idols? Well, I'll ask that question. Why is it so easy for human beings to leave the true God to go after gods? Why?
Our human nature is gullible in a lot of ways.
Gullible?
And the things that we can see are more, we're able more to assimilate into our ideas and how things should work because it's something physical we can see.
Right.
God's asking you to believe in something, a lot of it's not physical that you can see. So it's easier for us to see, to believe in the seen versus the unseen.
Yeah. And it's fascinating too is what the proliferation of gods. Once you leave the true God, then you got a problem. Okay, what do we have? The God of the storm, the God of the air, the God of this, the God of that. And so it becomes a plethora of gods and goddesses. And it seems that people like to follow that which is made in their own image. The book of Judges is a perfect example. People doing what they think is right. That's subjectivity. That's subjectivity. God's objective. There is a truth. And there is an objective truth. There is something that's real. Anything deviating from that falls in subjectivity. Where do you draw the line? You know, where do you say, no? Some people might say, no, that's too far. Well, why? What makes you think it's too far when you're already gone this far in? What stops a person? Well, it doesn't stop until you come to like Sodom and Gomorrah. And it's always revealed in sexual behavior. Do you notice that? The ultimate end of all sin seems to always be revealed in sexual behavior. We're seeing that in our culture. So the farther you go out, the less holy, if you please, things become and are. So that's why we need the prophets. So the prophet is trying, it's not that Elijah is trying to harass Ahab, he's trying to save North Israel. And he's trying to get into the head of Ahab, who's so stubborn, just like Pharaoh was. He's so stubborn, so weak, that he just won't bend. Now, there will be a point where he seems to get it for a moment, but then he casts it all aside after that when Jezebel gets a hold of him and says, hey, you need to straighten up.
Why do you think, I mean, because it's a generational thing and it's a lack of leadership over time, why do you think God let it perpetuate itself to this ultimate point? Was it the size of the example, or was it, why did he let it get so bad?
Probably, yeah, that's a good question. Probably so the difference can be so striking. Okay, which would be my assumption. Now, so Ahab is met by Elijah. We started out and he says there's not going to be any rain. Well, that's an attack on Baal, you know. What do you mean there's not going to be any rain? God says there's not going to be any rain until he gives me the word, until I say the word. Well, that right there is a challenge to the Canaanites' religion and what Jezebel has brought in and what Ahab is dabbling in. And so after that, it seems God takes Ahab because, Elijah, and, you know, he takes care of him, provides for him. Then he sends him up north into the land of the Sidonians, and he meets a widow, Zarephath, and he challenges her. And she feeds him, even though she doesn't have anything. It's their last meal. She ends up feeding him, and so she's blessed as a result. And so I'll come to that. The next crisis that occurs is that the widow's son dies. And so think of this, and this is one of the things that was a stark reality for me. Don't ever think the battle, there will be no more skirmishes. I know the war is won, right, for us. But that doesn't mean there won't be periods where there's a skirmish or a battle, all right? And so we have Elijah being shown that he can depend on God because God feeds him miraculously, and then God takes care of him when he sends him up north. Then there's a pagan, the widow, who's poor, that is blessed by her faith in trusting in what Elijah says. Then her faith is challenged again. And even Elijah gets a little upset about it. Why are you doing this? You know, why are you bringing this tragedy? Why are you killing this son of this widow who's been so kind to me? You know, that's the questions we always pose. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing it? And so Elisha prays. He gets the child in his arms, takes him upstairs in the house, and he lays on him 3 times, prays. And then the child, is resurrected from the dead. He brings him down and he presents him to her mother. Then what's the statement that's made is what ends this particular section, which is important. Verse, let's look at verse 23 of 1 Kings 17. And Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper chamber into the house and delivered him to the mother. And Elijah said, see, your son lives. Because he's been praying to God to let him live again. And the woman said to Elijah, now I know. Sounds like a statement that God made to Abraham. Remember that? When he was about to kill Isaac on the altar, present him as a sacrifice. Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is what? True. This is theological. This is the religious message. Who can you trust? The gods of the Canaanites or God? The one and only God. It's God, the God of Israel. He's the only God of the universe. Now, to be sure, there's miracles that are occurring. But these are here written for our instruction to instill in us a faith in the one who provides. I'm sure that when the son died, that the woman questioned the power and the God of Elijah, right? Yes, absolutely. And so this narrative is shown. It's not saying that every child is going to be raised from the dead. It's not saying that, to take it at that level. It's demonstrating through this event why we can depend on God. If he doesn't raise the child from the dead, if he doesn't get rid of my cancer, if he doesn't do this, I still trust him because I know that God will provide. It may be he provides through death, and I go with him in eternity, which Paul said would be much better. But it takes a lot of faith to believe that, doesn't it? Especially if it's one of your loved ones. But I also know that God can help your heart, can help your soul, help your mind through those difficult times, even when loss occurs. Why? These things have been written for us. Paul says, Romans 15:4, therefore our learning, that we through comfort, instruction of the Scriptures might have what? Hope. All right? So, she says, now I know. Now, think about this for a minute. I did an illustration. We ended on Eutychus, the young man that fell out of the window because Paul extended his sermon a little bit long. He got tired, fell down, he died. I mean, can you imagine that? In church, he died. If Paul's guilty, if you weren't preaching so long, he wouldn't have died. Well, Paul went down there and he raised Eutychus. This would be the last time that these people would see the Apostle Paul. And what did he leave there? An object lesson for them, an object lesson of faith. Just like work for God's being done in the pagan community, because you have a widow here and you have a story that she's telling, and the son, who's an object lesson to those around. Just like the man who was healed of the demonic possessions. Go and share what great things God has done for you. Okay? It may be God has comforted me through this tragedy. There's no way, haven't you said there's no way? We don't understand how people can go through the things they do without having faith in God, right? I've heard that a lot. How do you get by without any faith? Well, that's the issue. It is faith in God and who he is, his character, that gets us through. Now, chapter 18 begins another scenario. This is a whole different thing. So we've seen the provisions of God, how he has helped Elijah, how he's helped the widow of Zarephath. And Jesus even uses her as an example of faith. All the widows, all the poor widows that lived in the Sidonian area. And it was to this one that God sent Elijah. Okay?
Scott,
yes?
The other thing I think about is God is also preparing Elijah because the expectations of his faith are going to steadily increase.
Yes.
And I think that's part of the example for us too, because there's things that we live through that are tempering our faith for future trials that we're going to face. And I think he has done that with many of people through the Bible, that he's tempering these people because the expectation he has further down the line is going to be so large that he can't get them there in one fell swoop.
Right. And the interesting thing is Elijah's reaction to Jezebel, who scared him to death. After all that he's done and the power that he has and exudes and the presence that he has, all of this is leading up to that, and yet he runs. God doesn't send him. He does it on his own. He hides in a cave. God comes and says, what are you doing here? I didn't see you here. What are you doing here? See, he did that. All these other things, he's following God's path, his faith. Okay? So, after many days, the word of the Lord came to Elijah. So, there's been many days that passed by. Now, Ahab is hot on Elijah's trail. He's looking for him. And that tells me it seems that God, I don't know if he transported him or protected him to send him away from Ahab. There is something funny that happens a little later where Elijah has superhuman speed like the Flash. And he runs and he beats Ahab, who's in a chariot. And he runs before and gets past him. And so there's some interesting things that are happening that God is providing and allowing and intervening in. And God has been intervening in protecting Elijah. Why wouldn't he trust that God would protect him in the face of Jezebel? So, after many days, the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, "Go, show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth." So Elijah went to show himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria. This Samaria is the center region between Galilee and Judah. Okay? The city of Samaria is also located there, and that was the capital of North Israel. So if water's not in the capital of North Israel and they're serving Baal, they got a real problem. You know, where's Baal? How come Baal's not helping us? And Ahab called Obadiah. I don't think this is the prophet Obadiah. There's lots of Obadiahs. Who was over the household. Now, Obadiah feared the Lord greatly. And he worked in the household of Ahab, but he feared the Lord. And when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50s in a cave, and notice this, and fed them with bread and water. That's no small feat during a time of famine. So think about what Obadiah is doing here. He's doing it by stealth because Jezebel wants all the prophets. We've already been introduced to the school of prophets. There's lots of prophets that seem to be in training, okay, to be proclaimers for God. And these are probably young men in training that he's protecting. And so he's hid them, but he's fed them. Now, what does that tell you about one who lives in an unfavorable situation? Can you still serve God? Yes. You know, it's just like Esther and other books, you know. It's like Daniel, his 3 friends. It doesn't matter where we are, who is over us, what king is ruling. The point is to be a fearer of God, to obey God. So he took these 100 prophets, and Ahab said to Obadiah, "Go through the land to all the springs of water and to all the valleys. Perhaps we may find grass and save the horses and mules alive, and not lose some of the animals." So they divided the land between them to pass through it. Ahab went in one direction by himself, and Obadiah went in another direction by himself. So not only is there a chase to find where Elijah is by Ahab, they split ways to cover more territory, but also they're having to deal with the intensity of the famine. And the question should come to our mind, well, where is Baal? Haven't they realized yet that he's a farce? It's the figment of imagination. There is no God but the one God of Israel. And as Obadiah was on his way, behold, this word behold, by the way, is an interjection of immediacy. It's like all of a sudden he showed up, just like he did earlier. I don't know if God's transporting him moving along, but it's like that word is indicating, what? There's Elijah. So he meets Obadiah, and Obadiah recognized him. Here's this recognition again of whether he knew him from his preaching or his ministry, we're not told. But he recognized him, and he fell on his face and said, "Is it you, my Lord Elijah?" Now, when you read the word Lord here, it doesn't mean Lord like we would use it in regard to the Lord God Almighty. It's Master, Sir. Okay? And he answered him, "It is I. Go tell your Lord, your Master, behold, Elijah is here." Okay? So Ahab and Obadiah have been looking for Elijah. Obadiah's found him. He's ran into him. Ahab's still out looking for him. Now, Obadiah is hesitant about going to Ahab to say that he found, or he knows where Elijah is. Because Elijah has a tendency to transport away. And he's not sure that when he tells Ahab that Elijah might not be gone, and then he will get killed by Ahab for deceiving him. You see, that's the scenario that we're about to read. I wanted to kind of tell you so you'll be up to it and hearing what's going on. Behold, Elijah's here. And he said, how have I sinned that you would give your servant into the land of Ahab? He's saying, what have I done that you're going to send me to Ahab? And he's going to kill me. As the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom where my Lord has not sent to seek you. That tells us what has Ahab been preoccupied with? Finding Elijah. And when they would say, he is not here, he would take an oath of the kingdom or nation that they had not found him. And now you say, go to your Lord, behold, Elijah is here. And as soon as I have gone from you, the Spirit of the Lord will carry you away to a place I know not where. So he sees him as a prophet, and he knows that Elijah disappears. Now, I don't know if this is, it seems to imply something miraculous. He's not in one place for a very long time. And so Obadiah is afraid that when he finds Ahab, and says, come, I found him, that God would transport him, who knows where. And then, my life will be at stake. And as soon as I have gone from you, the Spirit of the Lord will carry you, I know not where. And so when I come and tell Ahab he cannot find you, he will kill me, although I, your servant, have feared the Lord from my youth. So what's the problem here? He's arguing with Elijah, and he's pleading with him. Don't make me do this. Why are you making me do this? Because I'm a servant of God, okay? And you're putting me in a risky position. So there's another crisis, right? What does a servant of the Lord who fears the Lord that works in Ahab's house, think about it. He's had a crisis of these prophets being killed by Jezebel. And now he's running into the prophet, but he knows that he doesn't stay around very long. The Lord transports him away. And so it's another crisis. Do you see the rhythm of things? So what's the embedded question? What's the embedded issue? Who are you going to trust? Trust God. Yes?
Would Obadiah be in similar, saying over the household, would he be in a similar situation as Joseph was with the Pharaoh?
I think so.
That high command?
Yeah, I think so. He evidently, Ahab trusts in Obadiah, and he's keeping him around. And he knows he's probably protecting Obadiah from Jezebel. So he's afraid that Elijah won't be there. Has it not been told, my Lord, what I did when Jezebel killed the prophet? So he's going to remind Elijah what he's done, that he doesn't deserve getting in this situation, right? How I hid 100 men of the Lord's prophets by 50s in a cave and fed them with bread and water. And now you say, go tell your Lord, behold, Elijah is here, and he will kill me. And Elijah said, as the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand, I will surely show myself to him today. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. So it all worked out for Obadiah at this point. I'm sure there's another crisis going to come up around the corner. But the prophet assured him that he would be there. Who's the prophet? It's Elijah. Yahweh is my God. He's the spokesperson, the mouthpiece, God's ambassador representative to the king. So, what do you find interesting in this so far that we've read?
Obadiah is very afraid of being killed.
Obadiah, though, has done some things, amazing work, ministry, if you want to call it, in the midst of a hostile environment. I would. The other prophets may have been killed. But surely, I'm sure Jezebel doesn't have a close affinity to Obadiah.
He's done a lot of stuff under that fear that he will. He knows that if he's found out, he still does these things.
Yeah.
If he's found out in any way, that he will be killed.
So why would he do these things? Why would he hide and feed? I mean, think about feeding these prophets in caves when there's a famine. Where's he getting the bread? Where's he getting the water? I don't know if God's providing it. If he's not, then he's searching. He's keeping them alive.
He's also helping him hide it because that has to be done.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of water and bread you're talking about.
Somebody's got to be looking. What's Obadiah doing? He's got another jug. Where's he going?
Yeah.
You know. Yeah, it's all under the nose of everybody. But when he takes care of the prophets, who's he trusting in? Why does he do it anyway? He fears the Lord. He sees what's right and what's wrong, right? And despite what might happen to himself, he's doing it anyway. He doesn't know if he's going to get killed or what. Now here, he's challenged by a prophet who says, go to Ahab and tell him that, I'm here. Well, I'm sure, I wouldn't think he's doing it alone. I'm sure there's others. Even God will say to Elijah later that he has, 7,000 who have not bowed their knee to Baal. So there's other faithful people of Israel. So again, we're reminded, about things and matters relating to God and good and right and evil and all this. Now, verse 17 is something that's interesting. When Ahab saw Elijah, when he saw, my God is Yahweh, that's what his name means, okay? My God is Yahweh. Ahab said, is it you, you troubler of Israel? Now, from that statement, what does Ahab mean by this?
It's all Elijah's fault.
Why is it Elijah's fault?
Because he's going against the belief in Baal and believing in God and made a choice, and it's his fault for that choice.
Okay. You could suppose, and this will come out later, that somehow Elijah has offended Baal. And Baal's not doing what Baal usually does in North Israel. See, think of the offense. And Ahab didn't kill him the first time, hadn't been able to find him. Now he's here, And it's Elijah's fault because he's not allowing Ahab and Jezebel, people, to do what they have been inclined to do. He's the troubler of Israel. There's, you remember the valley of Achor during Joshua's day? They defeated Jericho, and then they went to Ai. And it was a small town, so they just sent a few over there to capture that city. But what happened at Ai? They were defeated. And so Joshua is all upset and everything, prays, and God says, stand up. You know, they're sending the camp. Someone has taken the devoted thing, that which is devoted, the spoils, which God said, leave there, they're mine. You know, he gets the first spoils of the land of Canaan, so to speak. Leave it. But there's like gold there, and there's coins, and there's clothes, and there's all kinds of stuff. And what's the guy's name? Achan. Achan can't help himself. Neither can his wife, because they hide. He brings stuff, and they hide it in the tent. And so Joshua calls everybody together, and they go by family finally, and they come to Achan's family. He said, okay, what'd you do? He said, I took some of the devoted thing. It's in the tent. They went and found it. So they got his whole family. And what did they do to him? Killed him. He said, since you troubled Israel, you will be troubled. And it was called the Valley of Achor, the Valley of Trouble. This is the situation here, the same thing. You troubler of Israel. But it's not Elijah, it's Ahab. So listen to the response. And he answered, I have not troubled Israel, but you have, and your father's house, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and follow the Baals. Now, what does he mean by Baals, plural? There's only the Baal who's the master god. Why would he say Baals? Huh? I don't think so. I think he's referring to all the altars of Baal that are high places to worship the god Baal. All the altars, all the people. He stationed, Jezebel and Ahab and others, they built all these altars. And they've knocked down the altars of God, which Mount Carmel was where an altar of God was once erected. And so he's following pagans. He's following Baal. He's not keeping the commandments of God. Someone says, well, commandments aren't important. You know, isn't that being a little legalistic, keeping commandments, talk about commandment language? When has God not talked about commandments? If you love me, do what? Keep my commandments. And John even says that his commandments are not burdensome. But we make them burdensome. How? Why do God's commandments become burdensome? Yeah, when they get in the way, when they get in my way, that's when they're burdensome, When they inconvenience me. God's commandments become burdensome, but one who's a lover of God is not burdensome. That to me is a great indicator of where I am in my faith. Why would I look at God as being a burden when he's actually set us free? You know what makes us enslaved is sin. So, you're the troubler because you have abandoned. This word abandon could be translated apostatized. You know, you have abandoned, you have rejected, you have gone astray. Okay? And so you have gone astray from the Lord, following the Baals. Now, therefore, send and gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel. And the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. Now, notice this for a minute. Sometimes we read things and we don't kind of think about this. How many eat at Jezebel's table, her prophets? 400. 400 priestesses dying with Jezebel. Now, it doesn't seem that they're going to be present at the Mount Carmel. It's only the 450 prophets of Baal. And it may be that Jezebel didn't allow them to go. I don't know. But that's a lot. That's what she brought in from Sidonia, was all these prophets. And what do these priestesses and these prophets do in North Israel? They spread the word of Canaanite religion. That's what they do. They enforce it. They codify it. And so this is where we come to the climax of the story of the battle at Mount Carmel. So we ended just at the right time. Save the battle for next Sunday. So be here. We're through.